in Arashiyama, Kyoto, or when you go to a Shinto shrine, you will see markings on trees that show that they are sacred trees, and most Shinto shrines will have them. And then there's the fall colors. There's bonsai and other beautiful trees in Japanese gardening. It's a big part of the culture. Unfortunately, I've discovered recently a lot of problems related to trees, and a lot of trees in kind of startlingly large numbers being cut down or about to be cut down in Japan. And I've gotten involved with some efforts to try and stop that. And the more I've been involved, the more I've learned about this. So first of all, let me just talk a little bit about who I am. I'm not able to advance my slides. So that's kind of a challenge. Is there someone here who's able to assist? Okay, yeah, because I can't move my slides. Okay, so well, let me introduce myself and who I am while we're looking at this slide. And so I'm a management consultant. I have my own firm. I specialize in cross-cultural training, team building, and coaching. And a lot of my work relates to understanding Japanese organizations and how they work and how to influence them. And so that's what I help my clients with. Ah, great, thank you. That's what I help my clients with as a consultant. And so in my recent volunteer efforts with trees, I've been learning new dimensions of how to make change happen in Japan, how to influence Japanese organizations, how to kind of make things happen. It's been sort of a new dimension for me in an area I've always been interested in. So when I'm not volunteering trying to save trees, I work with major Japanese companies in their global operations, as well as major global firms in their Japanese operations. And I have headquarters for my firm is here in the US, and then we have a branch in Japan. We have team members in Latin America and all over Europe as well, working with Japanese and other corporations all over the place. I've been spending most of my time in Japan recently because I have a couple of external board positions at Japanese companies, and Japanese boards meet really frequently, and so they want you to be in Japan for that. So I've been kind of hanging out there most of the time, and that's how I got involved in all these things related to trees. So it sort of started for me right before the Olympics. As you know, the Tokyo Olympics was postponed for a year, and then the decision was made to not have foreign visitors come in for the Olympics. And despite and no spectators for events. And despite this, they were going ahead with plans to build public viewing facilities in Yoyogi Park and other locations that were designed to bring together thousands of people to watch the Olympic events on giant screens, which they evidently did that during the Rugby World Cup in 2019, and people say it was a lot of fun, but there wasn't a pandemic going on at that time. And I also heard from people living nearby Yoyogi Park that as part of plans for building this facility, they were going to be chopping off large numbers of limbs off of trees. And I thought, why are we even having a public viewing to bring thousands of people together right when we're supposed to be staying home and not infecting people? And why are we cutting off tree limbs for a temporary event? And I thought it was a bad idea. And recently, right about at that time, someone named Kenji Utsunomiya had created a petition in Japan protesting the Olympics going forward that had gotten really a lot of support from the Japanese public. And I thought, oh, well, Change.org petitions are now something that people in Japan are interested in. I care about these trees in Yoyogi Park, and I think this public viewing is a really stupid thing to be doing during the pandemic. I don't know if anyone else is interested, but I'm going to put up a petition. Well, I ended up with 154,000 signatures, and I had to take an entire week off of work because I was on TV all week. Kind of hit a nerve with people who were not happy about the Olympics and not happy with all the negative things that flowed from that. Ultimately, they didn't go ahead with the public viewing. They did build the facility because it's once you've paid the constructing people, you might as well build it. And They used it as a vaccination facility. One reporter did get someone from the city on record saying that they didn't cut as many of the limbs off the trees because they knew everyone was paying attention. So sort of a victory. So I had that sort of under my belt and had gotten interested in this issue of trees and what happens to them. Then fast forward to a year ago, so this is February 2022, and I, like many other people in Tokyo, were totally shocked to see in the newspaper that a plan had been approved for a major redevelopment at Jingu Gaien, which is a park-like area right next to where the new national stadium for the Olympics is. A lot of you are probably familiar with Meiji Jingu's Naien over near Harajuku. It's that stately, beautiful forest. Well, when Meiji Jingu was built, there was the Naien, the inner garden near Harajuku, and then the Gaien, which is over near Aoyama Ichome Station. It's in between Aoyama Ichome and Gaien Mai, because Gaien Mai is literally in front of Gaien, right? And it's very well known for rows of huge ginkgo trees that make a beautiful avenue and are really lovely in the fall when they turn colors. There's a rugby stadium, a baseball stadium, old historic stadium where Babe Ruth had played, for example, and lots of trees, other sports facilities, et cetera, in this area. And so a major plan had been approved, and at the same time, a professor had gone and compared the plans to what's actually in the park and said, hey, over 1,000 trees are going to be chopped down for this plan. And despite this being raised, and also there had been no public information about this, the Planning Commission had said, well, this has been discussed sufficiently, and they approved it. And I thought that was absolutely shocking. And I asked my Twitter followers, this looks really bad. Should I do another petition? And they all said yes. And so I started another petition, initially asking Mayor Koike to not approve, Governor Koike not to approve the plan. She ended up approving it. We've been carrying forward with protesting this plan, and it's very, very complicated, and I could spend 45 minutes just talking about the issues with Jingu Gaien and how it shows really basically political corruption. And it's just been really distressing. And it's ended up with myself and other activists and people who live near Jingu Gaien are now suing the city of Tokyo to try and stop this plan, because it just got so, the way they've been pushing it through and bending the rules is just so egregious that we decided to do that. But I'm not going to only talk about this plan, despite how bad it is, because what I've learned is now that I've been involved in this project, people in other parts of Japan have been coming to me telling me about other projects and other issues that are leading to thousands of trees being chopped down. And I realized that this is basically an epidemic in Japan that's very upsetting. So I wanted to give you sort of an overview of that. So anyways, this is me. That's a picture on the right. As of last summer, we had 81,000 when that picture was taken. We're now at 122,000 on this petition, which is all the more amazing considering that unlike the last petition I did when I couldn't not be on the news, this time the main developer for the project has been putting pressure on the news media to not report about it. And so we've had actually surprisingly little coverage for how big an issue is. But we have been getting some coverage, and that's me on the left in a Japanese tabloid. Someone asked me, was that on your bucket list? And I said, no, maybe it should have been. But it was kind of fun to get the tabloid treatment. And that was one of the better articles, too. The tabloid journalists in Japan are very good. So what are the issues that are happening to trees in Japan? So there's this rash of redevelopment of parks. There's mega solar projects in the rural areas. There's lack of respect for street trees. And there's also an issue of over-pruning. So I'm going to go over each of these, and then I'm going to talk about why is it that this is happening. Okay. So talking about redevelopment in parks. So here is an animation showing what's going to happen with Jingu Gaien and all the things that are being crammed into it. They're switching the locations of the stadiums and rebuilding them much larger. They are putting in high-rise buildings. Basically, they're rearranging everything to make space for high-rise office buildings. It's so, like, obviously greed-driven. And also Itochu Corporation, which has its headquarters building next door, is participating in this plan, and they get to build their headquarters twice as tall. So they get a benefit from it. Public land is being given to the developers. So there's, like for basically less than it's worth. There's all, and this is all a landscape preservation area that they went and they changed the rules of the landscape preservation area to make it possible to develop. So like, why then do you even have a landscape preservation area if you're just going to change the rules? So anyways, you can see how it's just being like, they're overbuilding this area. So that's one to give you an idea. The white thing at the front, that's the new National Stadium. And coincidentally, that really did not even need to be rebuilt. And when Tokyo had made its bid for the Olympics, they had said it was going to be a low-impact Olympics and they were going to reuse facilities. But then somehow they decided to rebuild the stadium, even though the old one was perfectly good. And 1,500 trees were lost in that already in this area. So that's Jingu Gaien. Here's just a picture of the Ginkgo Avenue that's very iconic. So many Japanese movies and other things are filmed there. It's a place that everyone in Japan knows. And what's going to happen with these trees is the developers are making a big deal. Oh, we're not going to cut these trees down. But they're moving the baseball stadium to 6 meters from the trees. And it's going to be 40 meters depth of building the supports for the stadium. So it's going to cut all the roots of the trees. And tree experts have said they're all going to die, or the ones that are on that side. So other parks, Kasai Marine Park is going to be redeveloped. This just news came out about this recently. It has a aquarium you can see in this picture on the left, which is a architecturally significant aquarium. Again, rather than restore and renovate, like we're just going to tear it down and build a new one. So these projects become an excuse for developers to build things. It's only about like 30 or 40 years old. It's not really that old. And I haven't been to it, but I've been told it's really lovely. And there's all these trees around it. They're going to chop down 1,400 trees and replace them with a field of solar panels. So chopping down trees to make renewable energy, if that isn't completely mixed up, I don't know what is. Right? So that's another one that's in the news right now. Also, Hibiya-koen, which is the big park right in the center of Tokyo near Ginza area, is going to be redeveloped and refurbished. There is a concert hall there, again, that could be fixed up, but they're going to tear it down and reconstruct it. They are making bridges from, they're going to be rebuilding the Imperial, other buildings near there, and then they're going to make bridges over the street and to make, so basically the Hibiya Park becomes like the front yard for this hotel and other developments. And to make space for the bridge, they're saying over 1,000 trees will be chopped down in Hibiya Park. And I'll show you some other pictures later that kind of how terrible the plan is. This is Mitsuzawa Park in Yokohama. You can see on the left, there are 2 stadiums. But no, that's not enough. They're going to make a third one. And the area on the right that is circled is going to be obliterated and a 3rd stadium put in. Lots and lots of trees, as well as sports facilities that ordinary public members in public would use. That's something we see in the Jingu Gaien as well. Only the professional sports facilities and an expensive tennis club will remain. All the other public sports facilities are going to be taken away. This is Oji Park in Kobe. And there, the mayor of Kobe has decided we need to have a university branch campus in this park space. Even though no university has expressed interest, they're trying to lure a university there. And then they're going to rearrange stuff in the park. Again, thousands of trees will be cut down. Public sports facilities will be taken away. An open space that was very helpful after the Kobe earthquake for helicopters to land will be eliminated. And again, no one wants this. The local residents are not happy about it. But the mayor, for some reason, has this idea. And I'll talk about it later, but it's very difficult for the public to actually influence these things that get decided by the government. Suzuka Shonen no Mori, again, another stadium development that is going to lead to loss of many trees. This is Doho Park in Tsukuba, where there's a plan by the prefectural government to build a glamping facility and a beer brewery in the park. And this is like, just you can kind of see from the picture, it's this lovely, quiet park where families would hang out. It's not a place that you would put commercial facilities like this. So there's this idea, we have to make parks make money. This one, there's some hope. I saw a big article that the prefecture is going to give the park to the city of Tsukuba because the mayor of Tsukuba is against this whole plan. But I've been in touch with the activists, and they're like, yeah, that was reported on, but it actually isn't a done deal yet. We're still watching this thing. So maybe not safe yet. So I kept it in here. Kamiseya is an area in Yokohama that originally was a U.S. military signal station. And about 10 years ago, it was given back to the Japanese government. It's this huge, beautiful space. It's also the, what do you call it? I don't want to say headwaters, but it's like a wetland area that feeds into an important river. And so it's I forget the word for it, but it's an important kind of part, like a tributary kind of a component of the water system in the area. And it's huge and it's beautiful. And it'd be perfect just to leave it exactly as it is because it's so unusual in the middle of the city to have this green area. But instead, what have they done? They've cooked up a plan to invite the next international flower exhibition. So they're going to pave over this green area to have a flower exhibition. Japan is addicted to expos. And Olympics, expos, flower exhibitions. Osaka's about to do an expo. There's a whole lot of literature in Japan about what's called haikyo, which is old facilities that have fallen into disrepair. And there's a bunch of pictures from the last time they had an expo in Japan for the flowers, with the flower expo in the 70s. And then the facilities weren't maintained, and it's all like rotten concrete, and it's disgusting. So, there's a scholar out of the West Coast named James Boykoff, and he calls this celebration capitalism. And it's really just a huge excuse for certain people to make money and using tax dollars. So, and then the idea is after paving this over for the flower exhibition, we're going to make it into a theme park. Like Japan needs another theme park. There's already Disneyland, right? So just to give you an example of the kind of things that have already happened in terms of park redevelopment, this is Heiwa Park, Peace Park in, and I'm sorry, it's not Heiwa, I put the wrong name. It's not Heiwa Koen, I'm sorry, it's Chuo Koen. I have to fix that. So it's Chuo Koen in Hiroshima, and that area, with it marked in the red, that area, they obliterated all the trees, and they put a giant soccer stadium there. So, the open space where people would have picnics and all the trees got taken away. So again, lots and lots of trees. This is Nagoya Hisaya Odori Koen, which, doesn't that look like a shopping mall? And if you look at pictures and how it used to be, there were lots of trees there before. And now it's paved over and there are stores. If you go to Osaka Castle, similar, There's, again, thousands of trees were chopped down near the castle, and they have a cool Japan event space there and a bunch of stores and cafes. So this is really an epidemic of developing parks. There's also an epidemic of mega solar parks. Not my parks, or mega solar projects. So basically, vast swaths of the Japanese countryside are having mountains be denuded of trees to put in giant solar panel sites. And this was a whole kind of scheme that the Japanese government had cooked up. So rather than, for example, here in California, a lot of people put solar on their roofs, and there's a lot of subsidy and encouragement for doing that, and companies might have solars on their roof, et cetera. So rather than kind of doing that in urban areas, which would make a lot of sense, or I've also seen things in Korea, they have solar that goes on the median of a highway. So there's lots of creative things you can do, but instead in Japan, it was made into an attractive investment opportunity, often for investors from outside of Japan. And the incentive is to just make these giant things. And we have big solar projects like this in the United States, but they're generally in the middle of the desert. Japan doesn't have big open spaces like that. So they're denuding forests for it. So this is another picture. I happen to be a real fan of Kyushu. I've spent some time living in Kyushu and also teaching at Ritsumeikan APU in Beppu. And the area around Mount Aso is one of the areas that I really love. So if you look at this map on the right, the green area is Mount Aso National Park. And the red dots are mega solar projects. This is a picture of one of those red dots that are being done in these beautiful areas or just around Mount Aso. But these are happening all over the countryside of Japan. And this was from an article in Nishi Nihon Shimbun, so that's the newspaper for the Kyushu area. And in that, they talked about, well, why is this happening, and who's giving land to these projects? And they talked about one of these cities, then it was farmers who previously had been using that area for grazing. And the economics have changed. It doesn't make as much sense. They can't make as much money doing that. So getting money for their property was financially attractive to them. And one of the farmers was quoted as saying, "We don't get any money for the pretty view." So they're like, yeah, it's pretty, but no one's paying us to maintain this pretty view. So that's another thing that's happening. There's been a lot of issues with street trees in Japan. So one that's been in the news in Tokyo is in the Kanda area. There's a street called Kanda Keisatsudori, and it has ginkgo trees on either side. And as part of a project for widening the sidewalks and redoing the street, the city decided we have to cut down these trees, and we're going to then redo this, and then we're going to plant some cherry trees. And the people in the community are like, but these are big, beautiful trees that are there. We really like them. No one asked us, can't you figure out a way to do your street revision and keep the trees there? There was another nearby street revision where they kept the trees and it was just fine. How come they have to be cut down? And the Chiyodaku, which is the area that they're in, has been just really basically obstinate and obnoxious about it. And so the local residents teamed up and are suing the city. The city has already cut down 6 of them. So this is one of them. Ginkgos are very resilient, and if you don't wrap them in plastic, it'll just grow again. So this is one of the ones that was cut down. Also in Osaka, recently the Osaka government announced that this year they are going to chop down 10,000 trees in Osaka. Supposedly because they pose safety issues or they are impeding traffic. And many people in Osaka are extremely upset about this and have been showing pictures of trees that have been cut down that look like this, that didn't certainly look dangerous or like they're in the way of traffic at all. No one can really explain why this is happening. Is it because the Osaka government is really into cutting costs and they just don't want to sweep up after leaves? Or they don't want to have to pay to prune them? Or is someone who chops down trees making money off of this? I mean, no one really knows, but that's a startlingly large number of trees. And Osaka has less greenery and less parks than Tokyo does. And even Tokyo on an international scale is low on them. So it's going to have even fewer trees. So, I mean, that's a huge number of trees for no apparent reason. So, another issue that happens in Japan is over pruning. And you might have seen trees in Japan that kind of look like skeletons. So this was one that was posted on Twitter. But there's kind of over application of pruning. It seems, again, to be, oh, leaves are messy, we don't want leaves to be messy, or, oh, we're not letting the trees sort of take their full shape is kind of an epidemic in Japan as well. So why is this happening? This is a picture from the Kamiseya area. There's this beautiful street that has cherry trees on both sides that they're going to be chopped down as part of this project that's going forward there. So why is all this happening? Why is this tremendous number of trees being cut down in Japan? So part of it is large public spaces, and this is another view of the Kamiseya area, are very attractive to developers. As you're probably aware, in Japan, if you want to do a large development, the first thing you have to do is actually buy the space. So for example, when they did Roppongi Hills, which is a well-known mall and office development, mixed-use development in Tokyo, they had to go around and buy up all the little tiny landholders there. For a developer, that's really a pain in the neck. However, a park that's really big and there's lots of space there, and you only have to deal with one entity, a local government. And then you can make contributions to those politicians, or you can do it in a way that somehow the city feels like they're doing something that they can point to. And so it's a very like, oh, this is an easy place to build things. Local governments, they love accomplishments. Oh no, see, look at this beautiful stadium we built, or look at this thing we did. They like concrete things they can point to, and they don't get as many points for maintaining something that's already there. These trees are two in Jingu Gaien that will be cut down to make room for that high-priced tennis club I mentioned. There's also kind of two long-standing issues that have date back to Japan from the Showa period, when there was more high growth. And one is called Hakomono Gyosei. And if any of you have ever read a really excellent book called Dogs and Demons by Alex Kerr, he talks about this. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's a book from 20 years ago, and I reread it, and it's all still the same issues. He has some stuff in there about, oh, Japan doesn't get enough foreign tourists, and they fix that. He has some stuff about the banking system that's old. But other than that, his book could have been written today. And so one of the things he talks about is that Japanese local governments love to build concert halls, stadiums, public centers, citizen centers, and all over Japan, and museums also, you'll find these types of facilities. It's really easy to build some big splashy thing and look like you're doing something for the people. Does that really improve their lives? Maybe they just need like better sidewalks, or, like in Japan, it'd be great if more overhead utility wires could be underground, but that's not as sexy as building a big hall or stadium. And so what we see here on the left, that's the new rugby stadium that's going to be built in Jingu Gaien. So that's a big box. And again, oh, well, look, we made that thing. The other word that's used a lot in Japan, it's from English, is scrap and build. So this addiction to tearing things down and rebuilding them makes lots of money for the developers and construction firms. But it doesn't really make sense anymore in this time of climate crisis and global warming. And scholars say that the most environmentally conscious thing you can do is refurbish and reuse existing buildings. And the worst thing you can do is just tear things down and rebuild them unnecessarily. But the problem is Japan is addicted to that, and Japanese politicians are addicted to the money that they get from construction companies and developers. Also, there is a trend in Japan to use private financing initiatives, PFIs. And there is a specific type of private financing initiative called a park PFI that was put in 2017. And so we're seeing the effects of that now. So what that is it's basically a scheme where parks are privatized. And the park or part of the park is given to a developer or other entity to build something there and use it, and then revenues go back to the city. And so it's all the wording around it makes it sound like, oh, we're going to have more greenery and make our parks better. What it really does is it encourages developers to put stores and other commercial projects in parks. Also, the PFIs are often used for building stadiums. So the rugby stadium in Jingu Gaien is going to be based on this park PFI. So this is behind a lot of the schemes that I just mentioned of let's put glamping in the park or let's put a brewery in the park. These are all PFIs. You know, the Hisaya Dori and Nagoya that looks like a shopping mall. Again, it's this PFIs. Evidently, this park PFI idea started in the UK. And it was found in the UK that actually it doesn't really work that well, and they've stopped doing it. But somehow Japan has really gotten a hold of this. Also, the sports agency has plans to promote the building of stadiums all over Japan, and it has a specific plan for doing this, as well as public funds attached for doing it. And so, well, again, a lot of these parks where, all of a sudden they're building another stadium, it's because of this project by the sports agency. And if you look on the sports agency's website, and they talk about, sort of all the issues related to doing all these stadiums, the only place they mention the environmental impact is, oh, it could be a risk because then people will complain. That's the level of like not caring about what's in the way of what you're going to put there. There's also, I've discovered that in Japan, the way systems are designed, individuals don't have a lot of ways to influence decisions about development and urban planning. And, there's a lot of, oh, well, we have to have a public meeting because the rules say we will, but we're not going to make it very easy for people to find out about it. So, for example, this is a sheet that I visited the people in Kobe who are protesting the bringing of a university branch campus to Oji Park. And there was one public meeting, and it was that little square there. You can see right there. In this is like a their neighborhood news thing that the public that the government puts out that no one ever looks at. The kind of thing that someone puts in your mailbox and goes straight to the trash, right? So it was like one little square there. Oh, we're having a meeting about it. Come talk about it. So people don't find out. I've been involved in protests against development here in California, and it's just like night and day that there are hearings and public notices that go to every person who lives in the area, and if you can't attend the meeting, you can send things in, and it's just night and day the amount of public involvement that's possible. The other thing I learned is that the environmental assessment process in Japan is basically a rubber stamp. In the United States and most other industrialized countries, environmental assessment happens before a project is approved. And I looked up the California law about it, and the environmental assessment goes into the decision of whether or not to approve the project. And the way California law is written is you can only approve the project if the public benefits of the project are deemed to outweigh the environmental impact. There is no such rule like that in Japan, and in fact, environmental assessment begins after the project is approved. So it assumes that the project is going forward, and so that means that the Environmental Assessment Committee can only recommend small tweaks. Also, even if they do environmental assessment, the committee can't actually force any changes. And we found this in the Jingu Gaien case, that the Environmental Assessment Committee keeps wanting, like, this isn't done and we need to keep talking. And the city's like, we're done, just shut up, basically. It's pretty bad. So that's one of the things we're bringing up in our lawsuit. But it's really pretty sad. It's definitely way behind other countries. And again, it's not just me who thinks this. As part of this whole process, I've become friends with lots of Japanese august academics, and the National Authority on Trees, the National Authority on Landscape Architecture, the National Authority on Urban Planning. Now, like these people are all my friends now, and so I'm also friends with Japan's biggest expert on environmental assessment. Like, he's written the textbooks on it, et cetera. And he's like, yeah, Rochelle, it's really behind. We really need to fix our laws. And so it's not just me. It's like the most prominent expert in Japan on this topic thinks this too. Also, there's a lot of corners that get cut in these plans. And so this is kind of a nook underneath that new national stadium that I told you the 1,500 trees were cut down when they built it. And so, there's rules about, well, how much green space you have to have, blah, blah, blah. This area in their plan counts as a green space. It's a bunch of potted plants. And in fact, they're blocking like some emergency equipment, so I wonder if that is even, appropriate based on code, right? And similar in the Jingu Gaien plan, they have like potted plants on the roof of the hotel, like, oh, that's part of the park. Right? So literally, they said that this was parkland. Okay, so they do all sorts of really, not following the spirit of the law type things. Also, you have just the feckless politicians and bureaucrats. And so I've become enemy number one of Tokyo Governor Koike, but she is getting tons of flack for all these projects that are leading to trees being chopped down. And so one of the tabloids dubbed her the Basai Jote. So Jote is empress, and she already had that as a nickname. There was a famous book about her, calling her the empress. And so Basai means to chop down trees. So she's now, like, her nickname is the Empress of Chopping Down Trees. Again, the tabloids are really good at coining these things. But that's, like, caught on, and people are upset with her. And she's up for election in a little over a year. And people are mad enough about this, partially because myself and the other activists are making noise. It could politically endanger her. And so what I don't understand is, there was a survey last summer by the Tokyo Shimbun, in which 69.5% of Tokyo voters said they were against the Jingu Gaien redevelopment plan. What sane politician pushes forward something that 70% of your voters are against? And that was even before it was as publicized as it is now. And she's been like dead set on pushing this forward. The Tokyo Metropolitan Government has been bending all these rules for the developers. They're dead set on pushing this through. And I can't think of a rational reason why. Like, isn't that sort of suicidal for a politician? What is she getting from the developers that's worth more than that? That's what I want to know, and I just can't figure it out. It doesn't make any sense to me. Also, there's corporate greed and hypocrisy. So as I mentioned, as part of the Jingu Gaien plan, Itochu gets to rebuild its corporate headquarters at twice the height. And right there, right next to Jingu Gaien, next to the headquarters, they have an SDGs studio whole facility. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, SDGs are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So it's de rigueur for Japanese companies and Japanese governmental bodies to talk about how everything they do is so in keeping with the SDGs. How can Itochu be bragging about its SDGs commitment and then be behind a plan that's going to destroy thousands of trees and unnecessarily rebuild stadiums? Isn't that the definition of hypocrisy? And same for, the main developer, Mitsui Fudosan. They go on their website, oh, we're ESG, blah, 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 and really? So that's a big issue. And then there's a lack of laws protecting trees from development. So this is a picture of the National Theater in Japan, which at the time it was built in the 60s, there was a contest for the design. And so this was the winning design that was built. And so it kind of harkens back to traditional architecture. It's kind of a gem of modernism in architecturally. And of course, it's going to be torn down and rebuilt into a multi-use building, including a hotel. And so then the theater will be part of it. And then it's expected to have a really big negative impact on the Japanese traditional arts because it's going to take a few years to rebuild this whole thing, during which time all the people who, the bunraku and the kabuki, et cetera, who perform in this facility won't have a place to perform. There's also practice areas. They're going to lose all their practice areas. So it's, again, it's like this mania. Let's just rebuild everything we can. Again, completely unnecessarily. I went to a bunraku performance at this theater last year. There is nothing wrong with it. It was actually, I went to it, I'm like, this is a great theater. No reason to rebuild it. And when they rebuild it, it turns out that there are a bunch of really famous cherry trees right next to it, kind of like in the area in front of it. And evidently, those are going to be torn down as part of the construction. They are in the way. If you've been involved with any development things here in California, there are lots of rules about having to preserve trees. There are no such rules in Japan. If it's on your property, you can just tear down all the trees and there's nothing to stop you from doing it. There's also this idea, oh, well, we're just going to transplant the trees. And that doesn't work very well. So they tried to do that with the new National Stadium, and all the transplanted trees that are around it are in really bad shape, and this was one of them that was just completely dead. They chopped it down soon after that. And the other ones are just like half their limbs were gone, the leaves are yellow. I mean, you can't transplant trees that easily. But there's the developer's like, oh, well, we're going to transplant them. And there's also a lack of awareness of the value of trees in general, and then also particularly the value of trees in urban settings. So one thing that's been a trend recently around the world is urban tree planting campaigns. So for example, New York planted 1 million trees, and now the borough presidents are asking the mayor to plant 1 million more. I'm from Chicago. They were early on the tree planting. They started about 25 years ago, and now those trees are huge. They're in medians all over the city. But if you just look up, there's tree planting happening everywhere, from Belfast to Bangkok, everywhere in between. It's a huge trend because people are realizing that trees are really valuable in urban settings. And if you search in English, there is a whole school of literature on the value of urban trees. So go to Google and put in value of urban trees, and there's even studies that have put dollar values. And for each tree, you know, they soak up excess runoff water, they soak up air pollution, they soak up CO2, they have a cooling effect. Tree acts like an air conditioner. I don't have it in here, but one of the, I told you I know all these experts now. One of the experts is the expert on trees and their cooling effect. And he showed a chart in a talk that I went to of, you know, the temperature of the world is going up. And it showed temperature of like New York going up, temperature of Beijing going up. Then he had the line for Tokyo going up much more than other cities. And part of that is because loss of trees. Part of that is that they've built a lot of tall buildings that block the avenues of cooling air coming in from the ocean. But if anyone's gone to Tokyo in the summer, it was never great. It's just worse and worse. And there was a study recently in Europe showing that planting trees reduces death from heat stroke in cities in the summer. So there's a really lot of awareness around the world now of the values and benefits of urban trees. I went to Google and I did that same search, Toshi Jumoku no Kachi, value of urban trees. Almost nothing came up. There don't appear to be any Japanese academics who are studying this, and there aren't a lot of people who are writing about them. Most of what I saw was reporting on scholarship from outside of Japan. So there's a huge lack of awareness for the value to the public of trees. And there also seems to be a lack of understanding of, well, what do people want from parks? And so in a lot of these park redevelopment plans, they use the Japanese word nigiwai, which means vibrant or bustling. Well, one of the reasons people want to go to parks is to get away from the bustle of the city and having a green space where you can just hang out. And so the value of that open space where you can have a picnic, why is that less important than using that space for a stadium? So there's a lack of understanding and valuing of just open green space. And there's also this thing that a lot of these park redesign projects, they don't seem to value trees. And so I just want to give you one just really upsetting example. There's a group of people protesting the redevelopment of Hibiya Park. And they have a online petition, and they talked about some trees have already been started to be chopped down. And so these are ones, this is at the southern end of Hibiya Park. So these are a bunch of trees. This is like a public building that's there. And so you can kind of see there's a bunch of trees. They were all chopped down. Where they are now is just like they just put asphalt. And they went to, you know, the developer shows a bunch of pictures of what the park's going to look like. And here's what they showed for that area. No trees. So their idea of what's a nice park doesn't include trees. Why is that an appealing park? I actually had Alex Kerr, who wrote that Dogs and Demons book. I've been doing a series of online seminars of various aspects of this issue. And he entitled his Sterile Development. So this would be prime example of sterile development. Whose thinking is this? And why do they think this is a good idea for a park? I posted this on Twitter. A lot of people said, boy, in the middle of a Tokyo summer, that big area with no trees is going to be pretty hot, isn't it? Those people look like they're having a nice picnic. In reality, they will be sweltering in 5 minutes and maybe getting heat stroke. Okay? So what needs to happen? There's a whole lot of things that sort of need to happen. First of all, citizens need to raise their voices. They're starting to do that. People are making petitions. People are signing petitions. People are speaking out on social media, etc. More of that needs to be happening. It's hard for a variety of reasons in Japan to speak out. but people are starting to do it. People need to contact politicians, and also people need to vote. Just like we have in the US and Japan, they have a big voter apathy problem, I think probably worse than ours. So that's a big issue, I think. Because politicians need to know that, hey, if they take away trees and take away parks, people might be mad enough that they get voted out. I think they can get away with it. I also feel like the legal framework needs to be revised, that Japan needs laws that protect trees from being chopped down. They need a better environmental assessment process, more public participation development. They need to change the legal structure for those solar panel projects. It's just really, what's the word I want? It's just distorted incentives that are there. Also, Japan makes it very difficult to sue, I am finding. And I'm learning, and there's very limited avenues or very limited legal bases on which one can sue for issues with development projects. And so that would be something as well that needs to be revised. And also, as people know, lawsuits in Japan take a really long time. And so then it's hard to stop things. By the time the lawsuit's done, it might already be built. So there's some changes that need to be made there. I also think, one of the things we have here in California is there's an open space project that, though it's like a charity, and they have funds, and they buy big areas to leave them empty. And so that's why we have a lot of the open spaces we have here. As far as I know, there's nothing like that in Japan. Why couldn't there be something like that in Japan, buying those areas from the ranchers instead of the solar panel people? And also, I think in Japan, they need something. For example, I'm from Chicago. In Chicago, there's a Friends of the Park, which is a charity that supports the park districts, things related to the park. And so I think having an avenue where people could, contribute to help parks, I think something like that in Japan would be really good as well. Again, there's not a history of those types of organizations, but I think that's something Japan probably really needs. And again, I think there needs to be more knowledge about trees. Like, why pruning them so much is maybe not a good idea, and why urban trees have value. And no, you just can't transplant them. And I've also, for some reason, a lot of people in Japan seem to think that new trees soak up more CO2 than old trees, but actually the scholarship is the opposite. And I've had to correct people over and over, and I'm like, why do people have that completely wrong idea? I don't know who's promoted it, but the scholarship is pretty clear that a large, fully developed tree soaks up a lot more CO2 than a little one does. So it's not just like, oh, we're going to tear down this giant tree and replant it with a little stick. It's not a one-for-one. So again, there needs to be better knowledge about trees. So those are my thoughts. I'll just finish here with, on the left is the petition for Jingu Gaien that I started. Also, there are separate petitions for the 2 stadiums in Jingu Gaien. So I ask everyone to please sign these and support our efforts as well. So let me take some questions. Yes?
So I have a question. So you mentioned that your architects interested in changing the laws of Japan. You mentioned California law and also Japan laws. Like Japan seems like they are bent on redevelopment. Well, like I know California is notorious like low development. Are you looking more towards the Chicago model? Because I'm talking to some of my peers. They say like one thing about bad on California is like the development laws, like especially with the homeless crisis here in California, like there's sometimes like unreasonable laws, so you can't like build housing. So is there like kind of need some balance, like in the East Coast, like New York and Chicago, where they build some housing, but there's preservation of nature, basically?
Yeah, you're right. I'm not saying that California is necessarily the best model for everything, right? And one thing when I think of Japan, I was a history major in college, and the area I studied was Meiji era history. And one thing that Japan did in the Meiji era is that they sent people out around the world to study other countries And they picked and chose, like, oh, well, this country, we like their legal system, and we like this country's school system, and we like the way this country does this and that. And they tried to kind of learn the best from what was done around the world. So this would be another example where Japan could look at what types of development laws exist. And there's different ones in different parts of the United States. There's Europe, there's Asia, there's other places. They could look and see what might be out there that would be models and ideas that they could use. And so I'm not prescribing any specific one right now. Yes?
My question is about solar technology.
Uh-huh.
It was sad to see that a green technology is getting the trees cut. I believe that problems caused by technology can be solved by more technology.
Mm-hmm.
Say, for example, recently solar panel has been designed in such a way that they don't block sun rays. So solar panels can be above the trees, and that is possible. So you should include more research also in your list.
That's a very, very good point, right?
Exactly. And because solar technology is great for the planet, so there should be more panels. There is no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and we need more trees also.
Right.
So together they can coexist. That's
yes, that
with
would
more
be,
technology.
That would be amazing if that were possible. Yeah, so that's a really good point.
Recently they came up with those
Really?
solar panels. They don't block sun rays.
So interesting.
Yeah. So
That's exciting. Yes. Yeah.
Hi, I'm just curious. It's a sensitive question. Whose individual pockets are being lined by all these projects? So in the U.S., I'm in development. It might be an individual that has like a 20-person firm or partners, but in Japan, it might be Itochu Corporation executives or people that have sunsetted out there, working on a retirement bonus or whatever. Like, have anyone actually identified those people and have you tried to convince them to come to the other side, so to speak?
Right.
Or do you have any people like that on the other side?
Right. Well, basically in Japan, the people who are benefiting from all of this are the developers and the construction companies. So the one that's doing Jingu Gaien as well as Hibiya Park is Mitsui Fudosan. And one thing that we know about is, have you heard of the word amakudari? So that's in Japan where people in government positions, like bureaucrats, when they reach retirement age at age 60 generally, then they get a lucrative, by sinecure, a very easy type of job in a private company. And really large percentage of the people who work for the Tokyo Metropolitan Government planning area go and get jobs at Mitsui Fudosan and other developers. Yeah, so there's a lot of tight connections there. So it's, in Japan, rather than an individual, it's more like an organization. One thing I can tell you that we think might be a deus ex machina for Jingu Gaien is there's a lot of evidence that one of the reasons Japan wanted to bring the Olympics to Tokyo and one of the reasons that they wanted to rebuild the national stadium was it created opening and an opportunity to redevelop Jingu Gaien. There have been, I don't know how much it's been reported on in the U.S., but in the last 6 months, there's been a lot of arrests in Tokyo for corruption related to the Olympics. And according to the tabloids, there's a rumor that the Tokyo prosecutors have an entire team devoted to Jingu Gaien. So if some of that comes out, that might answer your question. And it might also be scandalous enough to stop the project. So we keep hoping that the prosecutors will hurry up if they do have something.
Yeah, Sheridan, I mean, going back in Japan, LDP is one party rule pretty much, and they're pretty corrupt. I mean, Kakue Tanaka, and we under LDP they built bridges to nowhere,
Right.
They've paved over every river in Japan practically.
This is a whole extension of that problem, yes.
And so Japan has, this one, almost like the Communist Party in China now, where, it's growth oriented, create jobs, run by, the amakodari and the big corporations, and concrete and steel counts because it creates jobs. And a lot of it's run with the Yakuza because it's very corrupt, as we know.
It's very corrupt. Also, I found out recently, I don't know how I didn't know this, but Taro Aso, who's a major LDP politician, his family runs a cement company, and he was president of it for a while.
Okay. And so you have this whole history, like going way back, of corporate and government collusion and corruption, which is deeply embedded in the system, right? And that's why Japan has got their budget deficit double its economy, okay? And so it's not sustainable financially, okay? I was curious, though. I mean, we already know the past. How do you see all this playing out now, what you're seeing with all the, the parks being this leveled, which continuation? Is there a shift in the way they're doing it, or is there anything new that we haven't seen before, or is it just business as usual?
It's kind of business as usual. What I would say the shift is with this park PFI that was put in 2017, we're seeing more of it happening in parks. The other thing we're seeing is a lot of things that were built during the Showa era, so 60s, 70s, and 80s. It seems like the developers have decided, all those things need to be rebuilt now. And I've been learning lots of Japanese vocabulary as part of this, and one of them is one of the words I hate, which is rokyuka, which means outmoded or dilapidated or too old. And so rokyuka is the favorite adjective that Japanese developers like to slap on anything that they want to rebuild. And so now all these things like the aquarium in Kasai Marine Park, it's rokyuka. And now that automatically means we have to rebuild it. And there's no thought as to, well, is there some way to renovate it? So I think that's the new thing that now these things from before, like now it's ripe to rebuild them. We can say they're old. So I think that's a new thing. And I think this sports agency stadium building thing is a new thing as well that's come up. So it's kind of an extension of the old problems, but it has some new flavors. Yeah, and that's why I think especially we're seeing that. Oh.
Yeah, thank you. Fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for sharing. So, I'm curious about the word over pruning, because here in the Bay Area, you drive around, you cannot escape noticing fallen trees. Trees that have been never maintained, either street trees or private trees. They cause, loss of life, property, and also, electricity outages, and so forth. And I've always been an admirer of Japanese pruning practices, which is, look at the finished product, it's just a work of art. So when we say over pruning, the goal is to actually what's the purpose of over pruning? Because the tree is expected to grow back, and sometimes doing it properly, it will grow back and even become nicer.
Yeah, it's interesting because I told you I have all these professor friends now. One of them is Professor Fuji, who is the past head of the Japan Arborists Association. He's an expert on trees. He wrote a book literally on street trees. And so I asked him about this. I was upset. There was I was walking down. I live near Ningyo-cho, which is a very kind of old neighborhood of Tokyo. And I was walking to the subway, and they were pruning trees. And on one hand, was a tree that, kind of like that picture, was big and fluffy. And then came back, and like almost all the leaves, and they really pruned it. It looked like horrible, depressing. And I was upset about it. And so I was talking to him about something else. And so I asked him, what is going on with all this pruning? It's too much. And he said, well, Rochelle, it's overuse of a good thing. He said, Japanese pruning practices are really advanced. But Japanese pruning practices were developed in the context of Japanese gardens where, You didn't want the tree just going everywhere, and you wanted to control it, and you wanted to shape it and take a certain form. And he said, unfortunately, those have been applied to street trees with this idea that we need to control them. And he's like, really, a street tree should just be allowed to branch and like be cover the street. But he's like, somehow this idea has gotten taken so far, right? The other thing that I hear a lot is, as you know, Japan is a risk-averse society. So one of the ways that you can motivate people in Japan to do something is to talk about how something is dangerous. So if I want to, have a client do a sexual harassment prevention seminar in the United States, I'll talk about here's how much you could get sued for. Talking about possible negative consequences is a big motivator in Japanese culture. And so one thing that people in Japan worry about is the falling trees. And so people talk about that a lot. Oh, when the tree gets older, it'll fall. I'm like, well, not every old tree will necessarily fall, but sometimes that's used as an excuse for cutting down trees that may be more than necessary. So I think they're kind of, what you're saying is maybe there's a lot of erring towards not enough care or not enough maintenance. Japan might over-err on too much maintenance side of things.
Okay, I know we had a few more in-person questions, but I'm going to bring it to our online audience. They had some, and I'm going to kind of combine two because they're similar.
Okay.
So people are curious about your social media strategy for the tree-saving effort, and also how do you balance your professional career of working with Japanese companies? Does this ever potentially collide or conflict with your advocacy?
Okay, good question. So for social media, I am a big Twitter user, and interestingly, as you know, Elon Musk has made some changes at Twitter that a lot of people are not happy about, and sadly, it's crimped my reach in English on Twitter because a lot of people have stopped using Twitter, especially like non-Japanese living in Japan. However, Japanese are still using Twitter as much as they were before, and they've been sort of oblivious to what Elon Musk is doing, and his antics just don't affect people who are busy tweeting in Japanese. So that's still a very, very good strategy that's been working well. And also use Facebook, and we have a Facebook group of the activists, and I post things on Facebook and LinkedIn. Some of the other people in the group use Instagram. I'm just not a big Instagram person. And I think there have been a couple TikToks out there, but I haven't done those as much. Twitter's sort of my thing, so that's what I've been using. And I've been getting a lot of positive feedback from Japanese for my advocacy. I mean, it's made me a little bit infamous, and it's a little bit weird in Japan to stand out. On the other hand, in some ways, it's easier to stand out as a non-Japanese person as well. But I've gotten lots of positive feedback. I've had clients from years ago, like, oh, I saw you with Jingu Gaien, go Rochelle. So people have kind of crawled out of the woodwork. And I actually have a couple new clients that found out about me because of my doing this. So,
any other in-person questions?
So there's a whole concept of forest bathing in Japan, and is there a way that you can include that in your campaign saying, let's do forest bathing, and you walk around with an umbrella because there's no trees left or something?
Interesting. That's an interesting idea. We're always looking for eye-catching ideas. We were going to do it this coming weekend, and it's going to rain, so we're going to do it on April 1st. But we are one of the first areas that's going to be, sort of basically messed up is the, what is it called in English? The National Foundation Memorial Archives Forest. It's this little corner of, it's about, probably about the size of this room of dense forest in Jingu Gaien. And they're going to be transplanting trees and chopping them down. There's 3,000 total if you include shrubs. And we're going to have a human chain. We're going to hold hands around. We're just going to go around the whole thing. Actually, it's not the size of this. It's probably twice the size of this room, so it's pretty big. But it's not huge, but it's not small. Anyways, we're going to hold hands around it. If we have enough people, we're going to hold hands around. There's a second baseball stadium that they're currently dismantling. So we're not going to have a protest. We're just going to stand there. We're just going to hold hands around the whole thing. But we're always looking for eye-catching ideas. So.
Well, good luck with that. And another question from our online audience is, overall in Japan, what is the state of forestry? Is it getting better than the past or getting worse?
You know, that's a very good question. One problem with forestry in Japan is that after the war, a lot of sort of industrial forests were planted, and they were planted with sugi, Japanese cedar, and a monoculture, which is, as you know, not very healthy as a forest. And then it creates huge billows of cedar pollen, which then float over Tokyo. And this year in particular, it was very bad. It was 150% of normal. And people were just miserable with, and so kafunsho, the reaction to the cedar pollen. And now, and there's been a whole issue with that because the forestry in Japan became unsustainable because they opened Japan to imports of lumber in the 80s, which was then going to be cheaper than what was in Japan. So now no one's maintaining these forests that were planted, and they really need to just start chopping them down. And so what someone should do is just chop down some of the cedar and sell it and like make a natural forest again. But those are kind of stagnating. So there's a lot of issues with forests beyond even what I mentioned so far.
All right, any other questions?
So I have two questions. One, in the beginning, you've talked about like the importance of trees in the Japanese culture. So how can we emphasize that to promote the to preserve the trees? And the second question is the impact of these petitions. So did anything change due to this effort? And is the government recognizing this?
That's a good question. Well, I know definitely in the social media strategy, we have been emphasizing the trees and the love for trees. And I think a lot of people have really responded to that. And so I think a lot of our support has been on that basis. And so what about the impact of these petitions? You know, it's very hard to measure exactly, but there's definitely more impact than not doing anything. And it is a good way of getting attention, especially when we have large numbers of people who have signed them. And so I think that politicians are hearing. You know, again, with Mayor Koike, she's very aware of what we're doing. And I just don't understand why she isn't doing something differently than what she is. But I think that the petitions are probably one of the most effective things currently for raising awareness. And it does work really well. I mean, I've been enjoying using the change.org platform because they make it easy. You can update people who have signed your petition, and then we'll get an email with your update information. So it's easy to communicate with people. And so then again, you can create a community, you can mobilize people. We're doing regular hashtag demos on Twitter. And so we've succeeded 3 times for 3 for 3 in getting hashtags to trend on Twitter. And again, people pay attention to what's trending. So there's enough people who've signed the petition, and we say, okay, we're doing the hashtag demo, and then people participate. So again, it's a good way for rallying people.
Alrighty, any last questions before we wrap up? And I know we'll have a chance to mingle afterwards, so if you think of anything, feel free to ask Rochelle then. But thank you all for coming today, and thank you, Rochelle, for your lovely presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Alrighty. And there's food and drinks here for you guys to enjoy also. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.